Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, of course, for those of you that have seen my channel before, you know that mainly I like to talk about the sport of boxing and, mainly that of fight videos, whether it be that of the UFC or that of boxing. But, of course, every once in a while, I will talk about another sport, especially if there is an exemplary athlete, and, of course, if it's a sport that I love watching. For those of you that have been around my channel long enough, you know that the five main sports that I watch is that of boxing, UFC or mixed martial arts, tennis, which will probably be my favorite sport behind those two, and of course NBA basketball and NFL football. I've been trying to get a little bit more into the soccer world, but I don't have quite enough knowledge to commentate on that world as of yet. And even some of the other ones I will have to improve my knowledge a little bit on, but I at least know enough to commentate a little bit here and there. But anyways, for those of you guys, of course, that did not hear about the news, Mr. Novak Djokovic yesterday against Mr. Carlos Alcaraz in the Olympic final was able to finally capture a dream that he was always wanting for himself, which was to have Olympic gold, which when we talk about Mr. Novak Djokovic, that pretty much was the only thing that was evading his resume. And after this, to be quite honest with you, if the argument wasn't already up there before, the question is about Mr. Novak Djokovic is not only is he the greatest tennis player of all time, at least certainly the greatest male tennis player of all time, because I'm not one that likes to intervene between male and, women's sports or men's and women's sports. I think that they're two completely different categories. And what you're also going to notice in this video is that one of the girls here, of course, she's going to kind of try and compare that of the Novak Djokovic and the Steffi Graf equation, because many of the feminists and many of the liberals and many of the people inside America and a part of the westernized, powers, they've been really trying to push this feminist angle. And of course, one of those girls that they really tried to push was that of Serena Williams. And they tried to push that she was the greatest tennis player of all time. She was never, in my personal view, the greatest tennis player of all time, at least not definitively. Now, if you want to state that she's debatably the greatest female tennis player of all time, you can state that if you truly wanted to, but once again, let's not intertwine both men and women's sports because they're just completely different. A lot of the times the competition level can be different. Of course, when you talk about that of the women's scenes, they don't, or the women's matches, they do not play to the best of five. They play to the best of three. So once again, it's a little bit different. It is a little bit of a different sport, even though, of course, they have great talent there. But at the end of the day, I wanted to talk about that, not only that, but a certain amount of the narratives that also, of course, have gone throughout that of Mr. Novak Djokovic's career. But after he got this Olympic gold medal, to be quite honest with you, when we take a look at the great and vast career of Mr. Novak Djokovic, there pretty much is no stone that is unturned when it comes to that of Novak Djokovic's career, meaning that I don't think that there isn't one thing that the man ended up accomplishing within his career. And like I said, the question is right now is Novak Djokovic debatably the greatest tennis player of all time? Because to be honest with you, I think that that's pretty much undisputed at this point. And I'm not one overall that usually has an undisputed argument completely for certain sports. I think that a lot of the times that argument can be subjective. But to be quite honest with you, I'm not quite sure if there was ever an argument that was as undisputed in terms of their particular sport as what Novak Djokovic is for his particular sport in the sport of professional tennis. I mean, of course, we can talk about different eras all we want to, but pretty much every accomplishment that you would want for a tennis player, Novak Djokovic doesn't just have it, but he pretty much leads in every single category. But these guys are going to talk about it right here, and I just thought that it was very particularly interesting. And the question is Novak Djokovic debatably the greatest athlete of all time? At least when you talk about sports competitor. But we're going to get into it. Let's see what these guys have to say. We're reviewing a video by that of the Tennis Channel. Let's see what they have to say.
And here is Paris Paul.
Yep, it was quite a special day and amazing. Fifth time is the charm for Novak Djokovic. Just like the rings, it took him 5 to get the gold, and that man is something special. It is hard to imagine what he's been able to do. It's really difficult to comprehend everything he's done, everything he's won, the adversity he's faced, particularly in the last 3 months, to go out and play a match like this today that looked a lot like video game tennis between these two. It was just amazing stuff. Novak knew he had to get a little bit more offensive, and that's exactly what he did, and he did what he's done for so many years, just played the bigger points a little bit better.
Now Now joins this exclusive club just the fifth player, Steffi Graf, Andre Agassi, Rafa Nadal, and Serena Williams, to complete the career Golden Slam of winning all 4 major titles and an Olympic gold medal in...
Just to talk about a little bit of female tennis really quickly. Very particularly interesting, once again, how the liberal media will try to make you believe and feed you this stuff about how Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal, about how they were truly greater than Novak Djokovic, at least in a certain amount of the debates, or a lot of the tennis media, or a lot of the fans. But if you were to ever debate, that Serena Williams was below that of a Steffi Graf, someone overall that actually has, I believe, more days at number 1 than what Serena Williams does by a decent amount, and overall other certain accomplishments over that of a Serena Williams, they would pretty much go at your throat. They pretty much would attack you. So the question is overall is, why is Serena Williams so protected overall once again for her era? And don't get it twisted, Serena Williams is debatably the greatest women's tennis player of all time. I think that when you talk about that, it's between Steffi Graf, it's between Margaret Court, and it's between that of a Serena Williams. Of course, a lot of people don't count that of a Margaret Court. I personally do, because she was able to win also a lot of her Grand Slams with other great players around. I believe like that of a Billie Jean King and, a few of the other great players that would come a little bit later on. I believe even possibly Chris Evert, but I can't remember. Maybe Chris Evert was a little bit later on. I can't remember. But anyways, just to talk about that once again, those 3 girls, in my view, they have a great debate in terms of who is the greatest women's tennis player of all time. But when you talk about the greatest all-around tennis player of all time, if we were going to play the intermixing game, or if we were also just going to talk about men's, to be quite honest with you, I don't really even think that there's a debate anymore. I think that Novak Djokovic would have to be the undisputed greatest of all time. The only debate that I could really personally see is if you were going to bring up different eras like that of a Rod Laver, and maybe other eras, maybe like that of a Bjorn Borg. I believe that I'm pronouncing his name right. I believe the Swede, and maybe some other guys, and maybe claim that the eras were a bit different so they couldn't last as long. But pretty much every statistic that you would want to accomplish in tennis history, Novak Djokovic has it. I mean, if we're going to literally go almost every other single stat that he has when we talk about it, I mean, the man overall has basically accomplished everything. But I'm going to go over that when they bring that up. And then I'm going to bring up the great list of achievements that he has.
Singles, of course, Steffi gets the ultimate, doing it all in one calendar year, the true Golden Slam. But to be able to do that, now he checks off all the boxes, right? This was a big deal for him. The entire year, he's like, I want the gold medal at the Olympics. Is he now the greatest athlete of all time, Coco Vandeweghe?
Greatest athlete of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge call. He's definitely the greatest male tennis player of all time. I think we can do that, but you can't.
Right, but what's that basically this girl's way of saying is that she wants to try and intermix overall once again, the men and the women a little bit there in terms of what she basically just stated there. Listen, Novak Djokovic is greater than any of the women's tennis players that I've ever seen, period. It just is what it is. And, once again, I'm not someone that really likes to compare that, so let's keep those two in their separate category, because women's sports are women's sports and men's sports are men's sports. But at the end of the day, if you wanted to play that little game, there's no women's player in the sport of tennis within the history that beats Novak Djokovic in terms of his accomplishments. Once again, there's nothing that Novak Djokovic does not have. When you want to talk about Novak Djokovic and his accomplishments, I mean, let's just go over them. First of all, he has won every single Grand Slam, I believe, at least 3 separate times. He's won the French Open 3 times, I believe. He's won the Wimbledon, I believe, 7 times. He's won the Australian Open, I believe, 10 or 11 times. And I think he's won the US Open 4 times. So Novak Djokovic, first of all, he was the first male player, I believe, overall to win every single Grand Slam at least twice. Really still should be the only one, because in my view, I don't really count that Australian Open that Rafael Nadal got back in 2022. Just in my personal view, I thought that overall, once again, that they screwed over Novak Djokovic, and I thought that they purposely did that overall to try and get Nadal a little bit of an extra push within that tournament. But it is what it is, and of course some people are going to disagree with me on that. It is what it is. But it's whatever. But anyways, Novak Djokovic, now he's the only male tennis player, I believe, to win every single Grand Slam, at least on 3 separate occasions, on all 3 surfaces, whether it be grass, whether it be clay, or whether it be that of hard court, on the Australian Open and that of the US Open. That has to be acknowledged. When you talk about every of the ATP tournaments. Novak Djokovic, I believe is the only one to win every single one of them at least once and complete that. Not only is he the only one to ever do it once, but he's also the only player I believe to ever do it twice. So Novak Djokovic overall, he has that on his resume. He has the most amount of days at number one in terms of his sport. When you talk about overall his all-around talent and ability, his forehand was pretty much there with anybody. He probably has debatably the best backhand of all time, and he also is debatably the best returner of all time. A lot of people would even say not so debatable. He also is a great server. He's an excellent athlete. And in terms of coming up big in big moments, I don't know if there was another tennis player within the history of the game, at least with what I've seen, that came up as big in big moments as what Novak Djokovic did. I mean, if you just want to take a look at it, I've seen so many games where other players, even the greatest like Nadal or Federer, would have possibly perhaps lost those games. And Novak Djokovic was able to come back and win those games, whether it be overall, once again, that of a Dominic Thiem, I believe, several years ago when he faced him in the Australian Open, or whether it be that, of a Tsitsipas when he won the French Open, his second French Open, not too long ago, I believe in either 2021 or, maybe it was 2020, I can't remember at this point, but because he won so many Grand Slams, but Novak Djokovic also winning over Federer in 2017, I believe, overall, where Roger Federer was actually up 40-15, and Novak Djokovic actually came back in order to win that Wimbledon final. Novak Djokovic, in terms of the clutch ability and also in terms of the intellect for his particular sport and the all-around game, you would have to argue that he probably is the most complete player, not only for his era, but probably of all time. And I'm sure that there's other statistics that I'm not even mentioning. Of course, there's the ATP finals. He's won 6 of those. He's tied with Roger Federer for the most amount of ATP finals. And then, of course, when you talk about Olympic gold, that was the one category that many Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer fans, of course, always tried to put, in the craw of the Novak Djokovic argument. And now that pretty much is dead. There is nothing that Novak Djokovic has not accomplished within his career overall, once again, to prove that he is not debatably at least, the greatest tennis player of all time. But the question is, of course, is he debatably the greatest athlete of all time? And in my personal opinion, he is going to have to be in that debate. When you talk about overall the greatest athletes of all time, at least that are the most all-around complete and accomplished, in my view, you're talking about guys like that of a Michael Jordan. You're talking about a Tom Brady. You're talking about a Floyd Mayweather. You're talking about, maybe that of a John Jones for the UFC. If we're talking about soccer for this era, maybe a Lionel Messi, something like that. Now, for soccer, to be fair, I can't really comment quite as much. Of course, there would be a lot of debates also for Diego Maradona and also that of I can't remember if it's pronounced Pele or Pele. I can't remember overall, but of course, the Brazilian player that passed away not too long ago, the Brazilian who won 3 FIFA World Cups. When you talk about debatably the greatest athlete of all time, Novak Djokovic, in my personal view, he is going to have to be in that conversation. Because even if you talk about Tom Brady and that of a Michael Jordan for their particular sport, I don't know if they lead in as many categories, in as many individual categories as what a Novak Djokovic does. When you talk about it, Michael Jordan has 5 MVPs for his respective sport, but there are people with more MVPs than him, like that of a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I believe. Overall, he has more MVPs. Now to be fair, Michael Jordan, I believe, has the most amount of finals MVPs of all time. He has the most amount of championships, at least in terms of the current and the modern era, ever since, the Bird and the Magic era. When it comes down to it, other than maybe Kareem, but he kind of got one in the 70s, I believe. That would have been a little bit before the modern era, if you want to count that. So Novak Djokovic, in my view, he does have to be within that realm. But Novak Djokovic could even be debated slightly above some of those guys once again, because when you talk about the dominance, when you talk about pretty much every statistic, I don't even know if they lead in as many categories as what a Novak Djokovic does. Even that of a Tom Brady. Tom Brady, I think, has the most amount of Super Bowl MVPs. He has 5 Super Bowl MVPs, but he doesn't have the most amount of regular season MVPs. He only has 3, I believe. Of course, Aaron Rodgers has more. Brett Favre, I think, has at least 3 MVPs. And, Peyton Manning, I believe, has 5. I believe that's the record. When it comes down to it, of course, he definitely has the most amount of Super Bowls out of any quarterback and leading player within history, within 7. And, of course, he's won with 2 separate teams. But once again, Novak Djokovic is within that category. He's within those guys. when you talk about athletes, in my view, that are debatably the greatest for their sport, Novak Djokovic, in my view, clearly has to be the greatest for his sport. There's really no debate whatsoever. Now, of course, a lot of the narratives have been from a lot of the tennis fans is that Novak Djokovic fought or faced Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal at a weaker time in their career, and all that is bullshit because Rafael Nadal was only 1 year older than Novak Djokovic, and by the time that Novak Djokovic hit his peak in 2011, Roger Federer was about 32 to 33 years old, and he was still competing for Grand Slams. He still was one of the top 3 players in the world for a very, very long time, and he still was competing for Grand Slams, especially when Novak Djokovic was sometimes not in the picture because he needed surgeries overall and certain overall, rehabilitations. I believe at one time he had to have surgery on his elbow, and there may have even been a leg surgery in there. I can't remember, but I definitely remember. I believe he had a surgery, I believe, either on his wrist or his elbow, I believe, at one point in time. I think all the way back in 2018, and then he kind of came back, I believe, in 2018, to kind of win a couple of slams that year, I believe. I think that was the year that he defeated Martin Del Potro in the U.S. Open. But anyway.
Can't knock Steffi off her pedestal to do it within 1 year. I think there's that knock right there, but he checks.
Well, when you want to talk about debatably who has the greatest Golden Masters, or when you want to talk about debatably who had the best year in terms of tennis history, you could definitely debate Steffi Graf within that 1 year. I don't remember the exact year. Maybe it was 1998. I can't necessarily remember. But you could debate that if you wanted to. Steffi Graf, of course, that 1 year, I believe that she won all 4 Grand Slams and also the gold medal. And that is something that Steffi Graf, that does have to be acknowledged. She definitely is one of the all-time great players, and she is debatably the greatest women's player of all time. She is right there with Serena Williams. She's right there with Margaret Court, in my personal view. Once again, those 3 women, they have a great debate because there are certain things that put certain, statistics above those guys. The thing is with Novak Djokovic is that not only does he beat every single one of those people, if we even want to play the gender war here and compare those sports, not only does Novak Djokovic beat them in Grand Slams, or at least tie them in terms of the Margaret Court case, he beats them literally in every single statistic. Every single statistic. And of course, for men's as well. So that's the thing. Novak Djokovic, in my view, it really isn't even a conversation at this point. In my view, he is the undisputed greatest tennis player of all time.
Checks every box possible, has done everything in this sport. Kudos to Novak. I mean,
absolutely. Which, in my view, once again, puts Novak Djokovic as the undisputed greatest tennis player of all time. Once again, when you talk about the amount of Grand Slams that he has won and the amount of tournaments that he has won, I mean, the only statistic that Novak Djokovic may not particularly lead in, at least in terms of accomplishments, may be the most amount of titles, I believe, won of all time, which I think is led by that of Jimmy Connors. But we'll see if Novak Djokovic gets there as well, because he might very well have a chance at that as well.
He leaves no stone unturned, and I don't think there's another player like him.
Yes, it's just amazing when you sit back and we spend so much time going through the analytics and the history of results and what great players have done. And every time I look at him and I see what he's accomplished, and you look at how much he's won and for how long he's won, and you see the drive that he has, sometimes you just scratch your head and you go, why? How does he even do this? How does he do this to his body? It's having certain.
And on top of that, once again, Novak Djokovic has pretty much been rooted against ever since he hit the peak of his career. Now, some people, of course, they're going to put a little bit of extra emphasis on that. Some people are not going to put a little bit of extra emphasis on that. I mean, there's other athletes, of course, that have been rooted against to a certain degree. Michael Jordan overall was, at least to a certain degree. Tom Brady has been to a certain degree. The best of the best, Floyd Mayweather, the best of the best are usually rooted against, at least in some sort of way, because people usually want to see those guys fail. But Novak Djokovic, not only has he been working against a lot of the tennis fans, he's been working against a lot of the tennis media. Many people overall, once again, have been trying to detract from his career for a very, very long time now. But Novak Djokovic, once again, has always remained, whether it had been against Federer or Nadal, sometimes against Carlos Alcaraz, or Stan Wawrinka, or Andy Murray, or Juan Martín del Potro, whoever it may be, Daniel Medvedev, a certain amount of the other guys, he usually ended up reigning supreme.
Surgery just a couple months ago, losing a really one-sided final in Wimbledon, coming back, getting prepared for the Olympics at Roland Garros on clay again, did not lose a set this entire tournament.
And on top of that, Mr. Novak Djokovic has the leading record over every single great tennis player of his era. He has the winning head-to-head record over every single player of his era. Pretty much everyone that I just mentioned.
And today was absolutely spectacular at the big moments, served incredibly well. I just think it's just amazing to watch this man play. And as a tennis fan, I just want to see more of it.
Yes, and to beat the guy, by the way, who won Roland Garros this year. Novak said, I put my heart, my soul, my body, my family, my everything
Well,
on the
hopefully
line.
not his family.
That was the quote.
Okay.
To win Olympic gold at age 37.
It's nuts. It's nuts. It's crazy. I mean, I can't believe you can come from surgery and go straight into winning a gold. Maybe that Wimbledon final was just like a sucker play move. You don't know. Just like, here you go, Carlos. You got a chance, but then I'm going to turn it up.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll play conspiracy theories out here.
Going for number 25 at the U.S. Open.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it overall for this video. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. But yes, Mr. Novak Djokovic, in my view, he does now have to be in the debate as the greatest athlete of all time. Do I think that he's going to be in that debate at least as easily as what some other guys would be? No, personally, I don't, because he does not have the liberal media behind him, and he does not have a lot of the sports media behind him, overall, and even other certain athletes that were kind of rooted against to a certain degree. They still overall had a little bit of the support after a while, like that of a Tom Brady or that of a Michael Jordan. Novak Djokovic really does not have that much of the support behind him. Floyd Mayweather also did not really have that much of the support behind him. But when you talk about, once again, the greatest athletes of all time, yes, Novak Djokovic now has to be in that conversation. He has to be within that conversation of Michael Jordan. He has to be in that conversation of Tom Brady, Floyd Mayweather Jr., John Jones, or whoever you put as the greatest of all time for the UFC. Maybe a Georges St. Pierre or something like that, because to be fair, Georges St. Pierre was never caught on steroids, but I mean, that's up to you, when it comes down to it. But anyways, he has to be in the conversation with those guys. Floyd Mayweather, like I said, some of the other guys, maybe a Lionel Messi, if you count him as the greatest soccer player of all time, or Pele, whoever you may, put up there. Novak Djokovic has to be within that conversation. And on top of that, another thing that you could state for his era, when you talk about overall the surfaces, he was the most complete for his particular surfaces of his day. You could argue that he was all around the most talented grass court player during his peak years. Of course, he is one shy, I believe, of tying the leading record with that of a Roger Federer. But also keep in mind that Novak Djokovic, when it came down to it, that, he probably could have debatably had more, especially had it not been closed down, I believe, in 2020 because of COVID. And there were some other complications as well. But that being stated, if people wanted to state that Roger Federer still holds that record, I wouldn't necessarily mind, but it also should be noted that Novak Djokovic beat Roger Federer in every single final that they were in the Wimbledon. He beat him 3-1 in the Wimbledon, by the way. And once he hit his peak, Roger Federer never beat him again in the Wimbledon final. And he also clearly is the greatest Australian court player of all time, debatably the greatest hard court player of all time, certainly of his era. And in terms of clay court, he is the second best of his era. So when you talk about that era, Novak Djokovic is the only tennis player, especially of the big three, to where you could debate him first in 2 out of the 3 categories or 2 out of the 3 surfaces. And on top of that, he is not third or last in any single category. Rafael Nadal probably would be third in terms of hard court. He also would be third in terms of grass. Roger Federer definitely would be third in terms of clay. Novak Djokovic is not third in any single one of those surfaces. So not only, once again, does he have every single statistic, and not only does he lead the Grand Slam race, at least overall tied with that of a Margaret Court, but he has every single statistic, and he is pretty much the most complete tennis player of all time when you talk about his all-around game. And I believe also that he leads in winning percentage, at least compared to the other big three. I'm not actually sure who has the highest winning percentage out of Grand Slam winners, but Novak Djokovic, I believe, especially compared to the big three, I think that he has the highest, but I could be wrong. I'd have to take a look at that. But yes, Novak Djokovic definitely has to be talked about in a very great light, and he does have to be compared, in my personal view, with Michael Jordan, with Tom Brady, with Mayweather, with some of the other guys that are looked at as the greatest athletes of all time for their particular sport. And other people have tried to include certain athletes, of this era, in my view, in that conversation that don't really deserve to be there, like that of a LeBron James. In my view, you can't really compare LeBron James, to the athletes of this era, like a John Jones or a Lionel Messi or a Novak Djokovic or a Floyd Mayweather, because those guys, in my view, they proved that they were clearly the best in their particular sport. at least by somewhat of a clear margin. Now, Lionel Messi, for example, he took a little bit longer, overall to kind of prove that he was the clear best of his era. But now that he won the FIFA World Cup and he won 2 Copa Americas and a multitude of other trophies and, of course, a multitude of Ballon d'Ors, I believe the most amount of Ballon d'Ors of his era, he won a FIFA World Cup. He won, I believe, overall within that of South America, and he won, I believe, in the Champions League as well. Lionel Messi pretty much proved that he was the best of his era. Now, LeBron was the best of his era, yes, but he wasn't quite as dominant as some of those guys. Those guys you could debate are the greatest, particular for their sport. I don't think that LeBron James can be debated ever as the greatest basketball player of his sport. I just don't think that he can. But it is what it is, But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this video. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. But let me know what you guys think. And that pretty much is about it for today. We'll see where this goes. And of course, Novak Djokovic is going to have a possible chance to win another Grand Slam. I would not predict him to. I would probably favor that of a Yannick Sinner or a Carlos Alcaraz. But you never know. Novak Djokovic was able to pull this out. And now, once again, get the leading, record over that of a Carlos Alcaraz. Maybe he'll pull another rabbit out of his hat after all. We'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I'll talk to y'all later.